Right now, you are doing something that took our species 300,000 years to figure out. You are learning. Maybe you are watching a video, listening to a podcast, or reading something that caught your eye. And here is the wild part. The reason you clicked, the reason your brain leaned in, the reason you are still here, that has almost nothing to do with school. It never did. You probably think learning is a modern invention. Classrooms, textbooks, degrees hanging on walls. You probably imagine ancient humans as dim, stumbling creatures who barely survived, let alone taught each other anything meaningful. That is the story we have told ourselves. It is a comfortable story. It is also almost entirely wrong. Here is what actually happened. Long before the first university opened in Bologna, Italy in 1088, long before Socrates paced his courtyard, long before anyone carved a letter into clay, humans were running one of the most sophisticated learning systems ever designed. And they built it with nothing but each other. In 1999, Michael Tomasello at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig published a book called The Cultural Origins of Human Cognition. His argument stopped the academic world cold. Tomasello showed that what separates human learning from every other animal on the planet is not intelligence. It is not brain size. It is one specific behavior, shared intentionality, the ability to look at another person, know what they are thinking, and learn from that shared moment. A chimpanzee watches another chimp crack a nut and maybe copies the motion. But a human child watches, understands the goal behind the motion, and improves on it. Then teaches the improvement to the next child. Then that child improves it again. Tomasello called this the ratchet effect. Knowledge locks in, then it gets better, then better, then better, for 300,000 years. That is how your ancestors learned everything that kept them alive. But here is where it gets surprising. In 2017, Catherine Townsend and her colleagues at University College London published findings from a study of the Agta people of the Philippines, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth. They found something that should make every education policymaker on the planet deeply uncomfortable. Among the Agta, the best storytellers in a community were also the most cooperative, the most trusted, and the most reproductively successful members of their group. Not the strongest, not the fastest, the best storytellers. Townsend's team found that camps with more skilled storytellers showed measurably higher levels of cooperation among strangers. People who had never met before could work together efficiently because they shared the same stories. The stories were not entertainment. They were the curriculum. Think about that. Every lesson your ancestors needed to survive, which plants heal, which animals kill, where water hides in a drought, how to read the sky before a storm, all of it was encoded in stories told around fires that burned between 40,000 and 100,000 years ago. Brian Boyd at the University of Auckland, in his 2009 book, On the Origin of Stories, argues that narrative is not a luxury of civilization. It is a biological adaptation. Your brain did not evolve to process PowerPoint slides. It evolved to process stories with characters, stakes, danger, and resolution. When you hear a great story, you are not being entertained. Your brain is running its oldest, most powerful learning software. And here is the thing nobody tells you about ancient learning. It was terrifyingly efficient. In 2013, Kim Sterelny at the Australian National University published The Evolved Apprentice, laying out what he called the apprenticeship model of human cognitive evolution. Sterelny showed that for the vast majority of human history, learning happened through what he called scaffolded environments. Children were not taught in the abstract. They were placed directly inside the skill they needed to learn. A 7-year-old learning to track animals in the Kalahari was not told about tracking. They tracked, alongside adults, in real terrain, with real consequences. A child learning to weave among the ancestral Puebloans of the American Southwest, whose sites at Chaco Canyon in New Mexico date back to 850 CE, was not shown a diagram of a loom. They sat at the loom. They felt the tension of the thread. They made mistakes that unraveled hours of work. They learned the way your body learns to ride a bike, not through explanation, but through failure inside a living system. Modern neuroscience has caught up to what those ancient communities already knew. In 2006, researchers at the University of Southern California, including neuroscientist Mary Helen Imordino-Young, began a decade-long study on emotion and learning. Their finding was blunt. The brain cannot learn what it does not care about. Emotion is not a distraction from learning. Emotion is the mechanism of learning. The ancient world knew this instinctively. You did not learn to make fire by reading about fire. You learned because in the darkness, fire meant warmth, safety, food, and survival. The stakes were real. The emotion was real. The learning was permanent. Now here is the piece that will completely reframe everything you think you know about yourself. You have almost certainly done this. You watch someone else do something, type a shortcut on a keyboard, fold a piece of paper, parallel park, chop an onion, and without being told, without a lesson, your hands quietly started mirroring what you saw. You thought you were just paying attention. You were not. In 1992, a team led by Giacomo Rizzolatti at the University of Parma, Italy, made one of the most astonishing discoveries in modern neuroscience. While studying macaque monkeys, they found neurons in the premotor cortex that fired both when the monkey performed an action and when it simply watched another perform the same action. They called them mirror neurons. Later research suggested human brains contain even richer mirror neuron systems. That moment when your hands move because your eyes watch someone else's hands, that is not imitation. That is a 2 million-year-old learning mechanism firing exactly as it was designed to fire. You did not pick that up in school. You were born with it. Here is what that means for every classroom that has ever existed. For approximately 295,000 of the 300,000 years humans have walked this earth, there were no schools. There were no grades, no tests, no credentialing systems, no separation of children from adults for 6 hours a day to sit in rows. And yet, in that vast stretch of time, humans learned to navigate every ecosystem on the planet. They learned to build boats capable of crossing open ocean. The first known sea crossing to Australia happened at least 65,000 years ago. They learned surgery. Archaeologists at the site of Borneo, in a 2023 study published in Nature by Tim Maloney at Griffith University in Australia, confirmed that 31,000 years ago, a human had a lower leg surgically amputated and survived. That is not luck. That is accumulated, transmitted, carefully taught medical knowledge. Passed down not through textbooks, but through watching, doing, storytelling, and trust. The formal school, by comparison, is 5,000 years old at most. The modern university is roughly 900 years old. And the standardized industrial classroom model you probably grew up in, where children are sorted by age, seated in rows, and evaluated by identical tests, was invented in Prussia in the 1800s and spread globally in roughly 150 years. We have been using it for less than 0.05% of the time humans have been learning. And yet we treat it as if it is the only way learning can happen. As if before it existed, there was nothing. As if all those tens of thousands of years were just humans waiting around for someone to invent the lecture. They were not waiting. They were learning everything. And if you feel somewhere in your gut that sitting still in a fluorescent lit room while someone talks at you is not quite how your brain wants to work, you are not failing at school. Your brain is telling you the truth. Researchers like Peter Gray at Boston College, who has spent decades studying self-directed learning, argue in his 2013 book, Free to Learn, that children in cultures that allow them to play freely, to learn through doing alongside adults, consistently show higher creativity, stronger problem solving, and greater emotional resilience than children in heavily structured learning environments. The ancient system, it turns out, was not primitive. In many measurable ways, it was superior. Here is what that means for your life right now. Every time you learn something by doing it with your hands, you are using the oldest learning system on the planet. Every time a story moves you and you remember it 5 years later, your brain's ancient curriculum is working exactly as designed. Every time a child follows an adult around, copying what they do, asking why, picking things up and taking them apart, that is not a child being a nuisance. That is a 300,000-year-old education system running perfectly. And here is the gut punch. Right now, at this moment, you are sitting or standing or lying down somewhere, and you are learning. Not because a teacher assigned it, not because there is a test, because something called to you. Because your brain, which is ancient and hungry and built by millennia of people who survived by staying curious, reached out and grabbed onto an idea. That impulse, that pull you felt when you first clicked, first tuned in, first leaned toward the story, that is not a modern habit. That is the oldest thing about you. That is the same force that made a child 30,000 years ago crouch beside an elder in a cave in what is now France and watch, breathless, as a hand pressed pigment into stone. Not because they were told to, because they could not look away. You are still that child. If this made you see something differently today, share it with one person who needs to hear it. The ancient way was never about one mind hoarding knowledge. It was always about passing it on.